Wind River High Route is a 100-mile alpine backpacking route that traverses one of the highest and most beautiful mountain ranges in the U.S. Located in the northern half of the American Rockies, the Wind River Range spans more than 100 miles along the spine of the North American Continental Divide in western Wyoming. While there are several options for traversing this range, the route described by Andrew Cirque constitutes the highest and most intense version of this traverse, while still requiring no special or technical gear. This high route is recommended only for advanced backpackers. 65 miles, a full 2/3 of this route, are off-trail. It consists primarily of cross-country orienteering, tough off-trail scrambles on talus and granite slabs, and extensive snow and glacier travel in the northernmost sections. With 30,000 vertical feet of climbing, the route crosses 9 high passes, all but one of which are off-trail, and which range from 10,800 feet at the lowest to 12,800 feet at the highest. The route also includes 3 mountain summits: Wind River Peak, Europe Peak, and Downs Mountain, located at its beginning, middle, and end, and 2 of which top out over 13,000 feet. The route never crosses a road and remains immersed in a constant array of stunningly sheer vertical granite peaks, towers, and faces, imposing glaciers, wildflower meadows, and hundreds of lakes. Altogether, this traverse through the winds is one of the best ways to see one of the most beautiful ranges in the world, and makes for an unforgettable backpacking experience. The Wind River Range contains more than 40 named peaks over 13,000 feet, including Gannett Peak, Wyoming's highest point at 13,804 feet. With the exception of the Grand Teton in the Teton Range to the west, the next 19 highest peaks in Wyoming after Gannett are also in the winds. Perhaps most impressively, the winds also contain the largest system of glaciers found anywhere in the U.S. Rockies. There are a total of 156 glaciers on the eastern side of the range alone, with another 27 reported on the western side. These glaciers feed the more than 2,300 crystalline lakes and ponds that dot the range. The route begins with an unforgettable bang. Your first objective is to make the spectacular summit of the southernmost named 13er in the range, Wind River Peak. From here, you are suddenly in the heart of the alpine region of this range, and it will stay that way for the rest of the trip. To get to Wind River Peak, the first 14 miles of the Wind River High Route are on trail, mostly forested and gently graded. For the first few hours of the trip, you pass through the high desert plains that characterize the range's southern end as you stroll through grasslands and sage, before climbing through aspen, lodgepole, spruce, and fir forests. On the way up, you follow the peaceful Middle Poposia River, and along the way you gain your first tempting glimpses of the imposing Wind River Peak far off in the distance. By the time you reach the Deep Creek Lakes, the trail ends and the forest thins out and things start to open out into the alpine. As you exit the final stands of Krumholtz trees, you enter broad, rolling alpine tundra slopes above the final pair of the highest Deep Creek Lakes. Coming into view now together with the Little El Capitan across from it, Wind River Peak forms a dramatic and wild cirque off to your right. The climb up to the summit of Wind River Peak is over broad, expansive tundra, followed by talus fields. There are multiple false summits, so settle in for a long climb. in fact the longest single uphill of the whole trip. When you reach the summit, the entire range suddenly opens up before you to the north in all its rugged alpine glory. This is surely one of the most expansive and jaw-dropping panoramas of the whole trip. You can even spy out one of your eventual objectives to the north. Gannett Peak, Wyoming's high point, is 42 miles distant and identifiable by the distinctive horizontal snowfield just below its summit. The 6-mile section from Wind River Peak to the end of Black Joe Lake is some of the tougher and slower terrain on the route. Your immediate task is descending the West Gully to get off of Wind River Peak. This descent is one of the longest, steepest, loosest scree and talus descents, so be patient, and if you're with a partner, take turns so you don't dislodge boulders onto each other. Be careful to stick left before dropping down, as the heart of the gully is choked with sheer cliff drop-offs that are not apparent from above. By the time you get to Lake 11,185, the grade evens out somewhat and travel becomes less nerve-wracking. Particularly eye-catching from here is East Temple Peak on your left, with the distinctive pillar of a peak known as Lost Temple Spire rising up next to its main summit. This section of travel is also host to what may be the most dazzling display of wildflowers on the whole route. The final obstacle of this long downward journey comes near the outlet of Black Joe Lake. A band of impassable cliffs disrupts the otherwise easy shoreline travel. From here, things become more efficient as you quickly cruise down easy-going forested trail to the peaceful Big Sandy Lake below, where Section 1 finishes. Section 2 is characterized by connecting up a series of 5 alpine cirques, basins, and valleys. The main rhythm of this section is to ascend to a high pass, descend to a low point with blissful walking through meadows and past lakes, and then repeat. Section 2 begins by entering the renowned and aptly named Cirque of the Towers via Jackass Pass, the only on-trail pass of the trip. The Cirque of the Towers is justly the most famous spot in the entire range. Not only is it one of the most scenic spots, but it is also home to several of North America's most iconic rock climbs, invariably making this the most populated area that you will pass on the whole trip. On your way up to Jackass Pass, the view is dominated by War Bonnet Peak, constantly looming over you on the left and guarding the entrance to the Cirque. When you reach the top of Jackass Pass, the iconic view is breathtaking. After taking in the countless peaks that now ring you in on all sides, take note of Pingora Peak jutting out prominently into the middle of the Cirque, and the long knife-edge summit of Wolf's Head behind it, both of which offer some of the finest climbs in the country. Pingora Peak is also the vicinity of your next objective, New York Pass, which lies behind it to the north. As Cirque notes, there's a badly corniced snowfield at the top of New York Pass that forces you to reach it from a ledge system along its right side. New York Pass looks more intimidating from afar than it actually is. Though somewhat steep and loose in places, once you get on the ledge system, it provides a neat and handy route to the top. From the top of the pass, you look down at Billy's Lake and the Washakie Creek Valley below. Once you descend from New York Pass to Washakie Creek, you have a long stretch of pleasant travel for roughly the next 10 miles, primarily on trail, until you reach the base of Sentry Peak Pass, and providing an opportunity to make up some time. As you walk along Washakie Creek, looking behind you, you get more awesome views of the backside of the sheer granite walls of the Cirque of the Towers, with the backs of Wolf's Head and the trio of Shark's Nose, Overhanging Tower, and Block Tower especially eye-catching. By the time you reach Skull Lake, you strike off trail again and briefly head through thick forest in order to cross over to the East Fork River. Once out of the forest, you move over tundra up the East Fork and pass a series of 3 lakes en route to the base of Sentry Peak Pass. Here you are once again surrounded by an amphitheater of sheer granite walls spreading out before you between Mount Geikie and Sentry Peak. After the tundra ends, to reach the pass you negotiate a series of granite slabs before a long, somewhat unstable talus slog to the top of Sentry Peak Pass. From the top of the pass, you are looking into the rugged, austere Bonneville Basin, and to your left you can suddenly see out west down the Boulder Creek drainage to the high desert plains below. Carefully descend a series of steep ledges and slabs to reach Lake 10,828. Then move around the lake shores before a short, steep scramble to the top of Sentry Peak Pass by connecting a series of granite slabs and ledges. From the top of Sentry Peak Pass, you look into the next valley with the massive Middle Fork Lake sitting below. Your next objective, Photo Pass, is visible in the distance. As you descend from Sentry Peak Pass, Pronghorn Peak looms up on your left, surely one of the most singularly impressive and beautiful peaks found in the whole range. Section 2 ends at Middle Fork Lake, setting you up at the base of your climb to Photo Pass. Section 3 takes you through the heart of the range. It is remarkable for its remoteness, crossing the 4 upper forks of Bull Lake Creek, which flow through the Wind River Indian Reservation. Access from both east and west sides of the range is severely limited. A whopping 89% of this section is off-trail, and the vertical gain in this section is the most of the whole trip, averaging 738 vertical feet per mile. In the middle of this section, you'll summit Europe Peak, a mid-route 12,259-foot peak that offers stellar views of the range. And between Europe Peak and the challenging passes, you also walk through several stretches that arguably constitute the finest walking of the whole trip. Climbing up from Middle Fork Lake, you pop out at the incredibly scenic Alpine Basin of Beaumark Lake. The view behind you to the south is especially stunning, with Pronghorn Peak, Mount Bonneville, and Nylon Peak looking especially impressive. Good use trails take you easily to the top of Photo Pass, but it peters out on the descent, which becomes somewhat knee-jarring. From the top of Photo Pass, you enter the Wind River Indian Reservation, which you stay on for roughly the next 7 miles until you have descended from Europe Peak. Your next objective, Europe Peak, won't be visible for quite some time. As you enter the forest before crossing the South Fork of Bull Lake Creek, you navigate through thick forest without a trail and only sparse cairns for some time before you finally pop out again above tree line. After a circuitous uphill grind to the base of Europe Peak, the final push to the summit of the peak involves a fun and unforgettable airy scramble over a knife edge. The actual walk across the knife edge is very mellow, though definitely exposed. You pop up just below the actual summit of Europe Peak, so jaunt up to the true summit, where a marvelous panorama unfolds. To the south you can see Wind River Peak and Temple Peak, and to the north you see an array of darker, more foreboding and jagged peaks. The descent from Europe Peak is a broad and lunar alpine landscape, a vast, stunning ridge walk along the Continental Divide that stretches for several miles with views in all directions. Eventually turn off from the Continental Divide and back onto tundra in order to reach the idyllic Golden Lakes Basin and Middle Fork of Bull Lake Creek below. This picturesque series of 3 lakes surrounded by forests and meadows is the last well-protected camping for the remainder of the trip. From here, you exit the Golden Lakes Basin via Douglas Peak Pass. As with other passes, the going looks worse than it actually is. If you hug the far right of the pass, rather than going up the middle of it, you can avoid the steep scree slopes and instead connect up gentler angled, lightly tundra-packed ramps. From the top of Douglas Peak Pass, you look down into the austere Alpine Lakes Basin. Living up to its name, there's not a sign of any vegetation. Only water, snow, and rock exist here. Expect late-lying snow in a big snow year, especially at the head of the next pass exiting the basin, which may be completely blanketed in snow. The going through Alpine Lakes is some of the slowest on the trip. Especially onerous is getting around the final lake, Lake 11,335. When you finally reach the top of Alpine Lakes Pass, you look down into the next waterway, the North Fork of Bull Lake Creek, with Bull Lake Glacier itself finally visible directly across from you. Even more breathtaking is Knife Point Glacier, closer at hand on your left, precipitously tumbling over a series of rocks. According to Cirque, the next 6 miles are among the finest on the Wind River High Route. You start and finish on a 12,000-foot-plus pass. You see active glaciers and evidence everywhere of their influential past. You ford 2 milky blue creeks and hike across lush tundra with seasonal wildflowers. Perhaps the standout moment comes when you near Blaurock Pass and look down on the 2 huge milky blue floodplains at the head of the Cirque where the base of Blaurock Pass is located. As Cirque puts it, this setting feels like something transplanted straight out of Alaska's Brooks Range. From here you ascend the highest pass on the entire trip, Blaurock Pass. Blaurock Pass is the second largest climb on the route, second only to Wind River Peak, but Blaurock is steeper and gains the vertical faster. It's a relatively straightforward tundra and talus slog to the top of the pass. From the top of Blaurock Pass, you leave the Bull Lake Creek drainage behind and now look down onto Dinwoody Creek in the next valley. Notable on your left, to the northwest, Gannett Peak, Wyoming's high point, is finally visible close at hand. Descend down talus, then icy slabs, then finally tundra before reaching Dinwoody Creek below, where Section 3 ends. Section 4 is the most consistently alpine of the entire route, making it the overall greatest challenge of the trip. Until the final exit to your car, you are in a world where only rock and ice exist. The route crosses 2 glaciers, remains above 11,000 feet for about 18 miles, stays atop the Continental Divide at over 12,000 feet for 5 consecutive miles, and finishes by climbing the northernmost named 13,000-foot peak in the range. This is arguably the most rewarding part of the trip, though with such extreme exposure, no bailout options, and only extremely poorly protected campsites, you'll also likely want to complete it as quickly as possible. The ascent to West Sentinel Pass is a talus slog. Expect late-lying snow at the pass's top. From here, step onto the snout of Gannett Glacier. The glacier is dying and the ice has dramatically receded, meaning you're walking on just the last remnants of ice. After Gannett Glacier and past the saddle with the 12,025-foot Nunatak, you're faced with a steep gully you must cross and then climb up and out of. In a big snow year, expect it to be snow-covered. Its south and east sides are steep enough that trying to contour it without an ice axe is risky. When you make it out of the gully, the way suddenly flattens out into a broad, lunar flat. Bastion Peak, close at hand behind you, is especially striking. The milky blue terminal lake of Grasshopper Glacier is a truly beautiful sight, but also a haunting reminder that you are walking through a graveyard of glaciers. Go past the terminal lake and step onto Grasshopper Glacier. In a big snow year, you can expect a thick covering, which can mean lots of post-holing midday. Step off the glacier and reach the Continental Divide just below peak 12,705. For the next 5 miles, you will remain atop the Continental Divide, dropping below 12,000 feet just once. Along the way, you witness another even more beautiful terminal lake, this one from Sourdough Glacier. As you ascend up toward Yukon Peak, be sure to turn around for even better views of it. When you reach the broad saddle below peak 12,702, be sure to look far out on the horizon in the west. On a clear day, you can spot the unmissable peaks of the Teton Range. Finally, from the summit of Downs Mountain, the highest point on the trip at 13,350 feet, be sure to look back to the south over all that you've now successfully traversed. To the north, you suddenly look out on an entirely different world. The range abruptly ends, and in the place of alpine glaciers and peaks, stretches a broad expanse of barren desert plateaus and canyons. From Downs Mountain, your only remaining goal is to return to your car, although the remaining 14 miles are still a long and arduous process. While the way across Goat's Flat is gently graded, the route finding can be deceptively tricky, and the constant talus makes efficient travel difficult. Eventually, after a long time, you reach Glacier Trail. The trail can be bad in places at first, but eventually you re-enter forest and then cruise down a long series of big switchbacks before finishing at your car.